The cargo bay of the Zephyrian transport vessel Distant Hope hummed with the steady vibration of hyperspace engines. Captain Vexistar adjusted his four-armed posture as he reviewed the manifest one final time. The crystalline datapad glowed soft blue in his webbed hands, displaying the inventory of biological specimens scheduled for disposal on the next uninhabited world they encountered. His secondary eyes focused on entry 247C. One adult lichen female, designation Saber, approximately 180 standard cycles old. 3 juvenile offspring, ages 8 to 12 cycles. Status aggressive, non-compliant. Recommendation: immediate disposal due to pack behavior incompatible with civilized space. Vextar's gills fluttered with what other species might recognize as a sigh. The lichens had been a mistake from the beginning. When the Galactic Council first discovered their homeworld of Fenris Prime, the wolf-like humanoids seemed like perfect candidates for integration into galactic society. They were intelligent, had developed basic technology, and showed remarkable loyalty within their social structures. But that loyalty had proven problematic. The lichens refused to abandon their pack mentalities, their territorial instincts, and their fierce protective nature over what they considered family. Worse, they had rejected every attempt at civilized modification, from genetic therapy to behavioral conditioning. The Council had deemed them too dangerous, too unpredictable for a peaceful galaxy. The extermination order had been swift and thorough. Fenris Prime was now a dead world. Its forests silent, its great cities reduced to radioactive glass. Only a few hundred lichens remained scattered across the galaxy, most of them in research facilities or penal colonies. These 4 were among the last scheduled for disposal. Vextar made his way through the sterile corridors toward the holding cells. The ship's AI announced their approach to the Kepler 442 system, an unremarkable collection of rocky worlds perfect for their grim purpose. In 6 hours, he would open those cell doors on a barren planet and leave the family to face whatever fate awaited them. The holding area was dimly lit, designed more for cargo than living beings. 3 cells lined the port wall, their energy barriers humming with deadly efficiency. In the center cell, Vextar could see the adult female known as Saber. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, her body was covered in thick silver-gray fur that seemed to absorb the artificial light. Her eyes, a piercing amber that seemed to glow in the darkness, tracked his movement with predatory focus. Despite months of captivity, her posture remained proud, unbowed. She was a warrior, a mother, a force of nature contained but not conquered. In the adjacent cells, her 3 cubs huddled together. The eldest, a male they called Storm, stood protectively in front of his younger siblings. Even at 12 cycles, he already showed the beginnings of his mother's fierce bearing. The middle child, a female named Luna, pressed close to her baby brother, a small male called Echo who couldn't be more than 8 cycles old. "The human ship approaches our position. Captain," his navigator announced through the comm system, "they're requesting permission to dock." Vextar's head tentacles twitched in annoyance. Humans. Of all the species in the galaxy, they were perhaps the most unpredictable. Too emotional, too willing to interfere in matters that didn't concern them. This particular human, Captain Sarah Chen of the cargo vessel Defiant Dawn, had been shadowing their route for 3 days, claiming mechanical difficulties that required assistance. "Inform them we'll provide what aid we can, but we maintain schedule," Vextar replied. The sooner he completed this distasteful business, the better. As if sensing his approach, Saber moved to the front of her cell. When she spoke, her voice was a low growl that somehow conveyed both menace and desperate hope. "You've come to watch us die, haven't you, coward?" Her basic was accented but clear, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. To see if the great lichen warrior begs for mercy? Vextar found himself unable to meet those burning amber eyes. "The Council has decreed—" "The Council!" Saber's lips pulled back, revealing canine teeth designed for ripping flesh. "The same Council that bombed children in their sleep? That turned our forests to ash because we wouldn't bow and scrape like proper pets? Your species was given every opportunity to abandon everything we were." Her roar echoed through the holding bay, causing her cubs to whimper softly. Immediately, her voice gentled. "My children have done nothing wrong. They've never seen their homeworld, never run through real forest or felt real sunlight. All they know is cages and the fear in their mother's scent. For the first time in his career, Vextar felt something he couldn't immediately identify. Was it guilt, shame? He pushed the feelings aside. Orders were orders, and the galaxy was safer without the lichen problem. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it more than he expected. "But some decisions are beyond any single individual." "Are they?" The new voice came from behind him, speaking in the crisp accent of Earth Standard. Vextar turned to see Captain Sarah Chen standing in the entrance to the holding bay. She was small by Galactic standards, barely 5.5 feet tall, with the typical human coloring of dark hair and brown eyes. But there was something in her posture, in the way she carried herself, that reminded him uncomfortably of the lichen female. "Captain Chen," Vextar said carefully, "you were to remain in the docking bay during repairs." "Repairs are complete," she replied, her gaze fixed on the cells. "I just wanted to see what cargo was so important it couldn't wait for proper maintenance cycles." Sarah approached Saber's cell, seemingly unconcerned by the energy barrier or the dangerous predator beyond it. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "I am Saber of the Moonhowl Pack," came the proud reply. "Daughter of Alpha Prime Fenris, mother to these cubs and the last free lichen in the galaxy." "Sarah Chen," the human replied simply. "And you're not the last anything." "Not while I'm here." Vextar's gills fluttered rapidly. "Captain Chen, I must insist you return to your ship. This is a council-sanctioned operation, and interference would be what exactly?" Sarah's brown eyes were suddenly as cold as deep space. "A violation of galactic law? Like genocide?" The word hung in the recycled air like a curse. The tension in the holding bay was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Captain Vextar's forearms trembled slightly as he processed the human's accusation. In all his years serving the Galactic Council, no one had dared speak such words aloud, even though many thought them. "Captain Chen," he said carefully, "you don't understand the full situation. The lichen species posed a significant threat to galactic peace. Their aggressive nature, their refusal to integrate, their refusal to be slaves, you mean?" Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. She knelt beside Saber's cell, ignoring the energy barrier that hummed with enough power to disintegrate flesh. "I've read the reports, Captain. All of them. Including the classified ones about Fenris Prime." Vextar's gills went completely still. "Those files are sealed under Council security protocols. No human vessel would have access. You'd be surprised what we humans can access when we put our minds to it." Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Did you know that before the bombing, the lichens had developed a cure for Rigellian blood plague? That they'd offered to share it freely with the galaxy, asking nothing in return?" The silence that followed was broken only by the soft whimpering of the cubs. Even Saber's eyes widened slightly at this information. "That's impossible," Vextar whispered. "The plague has killed millions across 17 systems. If such a cure existed, it would make someone very wealthy, wouldn't it?" Sarah stood slowly, her gaze never leaving the Zephyrian captain, especially if they could claim ownership of the research after the original developers were removed from the equation. The implications hit Vextar like a physical blow. The Council's pharmaceutical division had announced a breakthrough treatment for Rigellian blood plague, just months after Fenris Prime's destruction. The treatment was expensive, requiring ongoing doses, and had made certain Council members incredibly rich. "You're suggesting the Council committed genocide for profit?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not suggesting anything," Sarah replied. "I'm stating facts. The lichens weren't destroyed because they were dangerous. They were destroyed because they were inconvenient. Because they wouldn't play the game according to the rules, and because someone wanted what they had." Saber pressed against the energy barrier, her amber eyes locked on Sarah's face. "You speak truth, human. But why do you care? Your species has shown little love for those the galaxy discards." Sarah turned to face the lichen mother directly. "Because I know what it's like to be underestimated, to be written off as primitive or dangerous because you don't fit someone else's idea of civilized." She paused, her expression softening. "And because no child should die for the sins of adults who fear what they don't understand." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain, we're approaching the designated disposal coordinates. Please prepare for atmospheric descent." Vextar stood frozen, his worldview crumbling around him. Everything he'd believed about the Council, about his service, about the righteousness of their cause was dissolving like salt in acid. But orders were orders, and his crew expected him to follow through. I have to complete the mission," he said finally, though the words felt like poison on his tongue. No, Sarah said simply. You don't. The council will do exactly what they've always done. Cover their tracks, silence witnesses, and move on to the next profitable opportunity. Sarah's eyes blazed with sudden fury. But not today. Not while I'm here to stop it. Before anyone could react, Sarah pulled a small device from her jacket and triggered it. The ship's lights flickered, and the energy barriers containing the lichens shimmered and died. Emergency power only, Captain, came the panicked voice of his engineer over the comm. Something's disrupted our main reactor. We're running on backup systems. Saber was out of her cell in an instant, moving with fluid grace despite months of captivity. She gathered her cubs to her, checking each one for injuries with gentle but efficient touches. When she was satisfied they were unharmed, she turned to Sarah with an expression of profound gratitude. You have freed us, but for what purpose? We cannot fly your human ships and we have nowhere to go. You're going home, Sarah said firmly. Not to Fenris Prime, but to a new home. One where you'll be safe, where your cubs can grow up free. Vextar found his voice. Captain Chen, this is madness. Even if you could escape my ship, the Council will never stop hunting them. The moment they're discovered, who says they'll be discovered? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. The galaxy is a big place, Captain, and humans have a talent for finding the spaces between official maps. She activated another device, and suddenly the holding bay was filled with the sound of additional voices, human voices speaking in the clipped tones of military precision. Defiant dawn to package recipients. We have visual confirmation. Transport in progress. Through the viewport, Vextar could see sleek human fighters materializing around his ship like ghosts. They'd been there all along, hidden by some technology he didn't recognize, waiting for Sarah's signal. You planned this, he breathed. The mechanical problems, the docking request, all of it. The underground railroad, Sarah explained as her people began cutting through the hull with precision plasma torches. It's an old human concept. When a system becomes so corrupt that it consumes innocence, sometimes the only moral choice is to work outside that system. You're talking about rebellion against the Galactic Council. They'll hunt you to the ends of space. Let them try. Sarah knelt before Saber's cubs, speaking gently. Don't be afraid. These are friends. They're going to take you somewhere safe, somewhere with trees and fresh air and room to run. Little Echo, the youngest, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are you an angel? He asked in heavily accented basic. Sarah laughed, and for the first time since entering the holding bay, the sound was genuinely warm. No, little one. I'm just someone who believes that families should stay together. The hull breach was complete. Human soldiers in environmental suits moved through the opening with military efficiency, but their handling of the Lichen family was gentle, almost reverent. They'd brought proper clothing sized for the cubs, warm blankets, and medical supplies. As they prepared to leave, Saber caught Sarah's arm with one clawed hand. Why, she asked simply. Your species owes us nothing. Sarah looked into those fierce amber eyes and saw not a monster or a threat, but a mother trying to protect her children in a hostile universe. It was an expression she recognized, one that transcended species or politics or the cold calculations of galactic power. Because it's right, she said simply, and sometimes that's reason enough. The human rescue ship Haven's Grace was unlike anything Saber had ever experienced. Where council vessels were sterile and cold, this ship hummed with life. The corridors were wider than standard, designed to accommodate different body types and movement patterns. Soft lighting mimicked natural sunlight, and the air carried hints of growing things instead of recycled atmosphere and disinfectant. Saber's cubs pressed close to her as they were escorted through the ship. Their eyes were wide with wonder and fear in equal measure. After so many months in cramped cells, the open spaces felt impossibly large. Storm, her eldest, maintained his protective stance but kept turning his head to track new sights and sounds. Luna held tight to little Echo's hand, whispering reassurances in their native tongue. This way, said their escort, a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She wore the simple jumpsuit of a ship's medic, but moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to handling frightened refugees. Captain Chen wants to speak with you before we jump to hyperspace. The bridge of the Haven's Grace was a study in controlled chaos. Humans moved with purpose between stations, calling out coordinates and system reports. But what struck Saber most was the diversity. These weren't just humans she saw, but members of at least 6 different species working side by side. A crystalline shard entity interfaced directly with the navigation computer, while a tall, plant-like Verdani monitored atmospheric controls. "Welcome aboard," Captain Chen said, turning from a conversation with her first officer. She'd changed from her earlier civilian clothes into the practical uniform of a ship's captain, but her expression remained warm. "I know this is overwhelming, but you're safe now." "For how long?" Saber asked. Despite her gratitude, her warrior instincts remained sharp. "You've made powerful enemies to save us. The Council won't simply forget this insult." "The Council has bigger problems than a few missing prisoners," Chen replied with a slight smile. "News of what really happened on Fenris Prime is starting to leak. Turns out quite a few species are uncomfortable with genocide for profit." "Who would have thought?" She gestured to the main view screen, where a cascade of data streams flowed in multiple languages. "That's intelligence from 17 different worlds, all asking uncomfortable questions about Council policies. The Andorian Trade Federation has already withdrawn from 3 joint ventures. The Tau Ceti colonies are demanding independent oversight of all Council research projects." Saber studied the information, her enhanced senses picking up the emotional undertones of the bridge crew. Hope, determination, and something else. Something that felt like righteous anger carefully contained and channeled toward productive purpose. "You're not just rescuers," she realized. "You're revolutionaries." "We prefer reformers," Chen said diplomatically. "But yes, we're working to change things. The current system is broken, corrupt, and ultimately unsustainable. Species like yours are just the most visible victims. And you believe you can succeed against the combined might of the Galactic Council?" Chen's smile grew sharper. "Saber, let me tell you something about humans. We have a saying. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We may not see victory in our lifetime, but we'll make sure it comes eventually." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. The communications officer, a young human male with cybernetic enhancements, looked up from his station. "Captain, we're getting a priority transmission from New Geneva Station. It's Admiral Rodriguez." "Put it through to my ready room," Chen ordered. She turned back to Saber. "Maria will get you and your cubs settled. Your new home is still 3 days' travel, but I think you'll like it." As they left the bridge, Saber caught Storm staring at the weapons console with professional interest. Despite his youth, her son had inherited the tactical mind of his warrior lineage. The human weapons officer noticed his attention and grinned. "Impressive setup, isn't it? Dual plasma cannons, torpedo tubes, and a defensive grid that would make a Council dreadnought think twice." "You fight the Council directly?" Storm asked in careful basic. "When we have to," the officer replied, "but we prefer outsmarting them. More effective, fewer casualties on both sides." Maria, their medic escort, gently guided them toward the residential section. "Your quarters are just ahead. We've tried to make them as comfortable as possible, but if you need anything adjusted, just let us know." The family's quarters were a revelation. Instead of separate cells, they had a common living area with sleeping alcoves arranged around it. The floors were covered with something that felt almost like natural grass under their feet, and one wall displayed a holographic forest scene that shifted gently with simulated weather patterns. "It's beautiful," Luna whispered, approaching the forest display with cautious wonder. "The computer can change it to any environment you prefer," Maria explained. "Mountains, oceans, even reconstructions of Fenris Prime before—" She caught herself, but Saber simply nodded. "Before they murdered our world." "It's all right to say it. The truth should be spoken." Echo had discovered a low platform covered in soft cushions. He climbed onto it and immediately began to knead the material with his claws, a deep purr rumbling in his chest. It was the first time Saber had heard that sound since their capture. "The platform adjusts to your preferred sleeping temperature and firmness," Maria continued, "and the replicator can provide any type of food. We have extensive files on lichen dietary needs." As Maria left them to settle in, Saber gathered her cubs close. The stress of the day was finally catching up with them, and she could smell their exhaustion beneath the excitement of freedom. "Mama," Storm said quietly, "are we really safe? Or is this just another kind of cage?" It was the question Saber had been asking herself. The humans seemed genuine, their ship was impressive, and their cause appeared just. But trust was a luxury her species could no longer afford easily. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for now we're together. We're free and we're alive." That's more than we had this morning. Luna curled up beside her little brother on the sleeping platform. Tell us about the old forest, Mama. About the great trees and the silver streams. Saber began the familiar story, one passed down through generations of her people. As she spoke of ancient groves and moonlit hunts, she watched her cubs' eyes grow heavy. They fell asleep to tales of a home they'd never seen but carried in their genetic memory. Long after they were settled, Saber remained awake, her predator's senses monitoring the ship around them. She could hear the steady thrum of engines, the soft conversations of night shift crew, and the thousand small sounds of a living vessel traveling through the void. Somewhere in that symphony of sound, she detected something unexpected. Another voice speaking in low, familiar syllables, another Lycan voice. Her head came up sharply, ears swiveling to isolate the sound. It came from several decks below, faint but unmistakable. Another survivor. Another of her people thought extinct, living and breathing aboard this human ship. As she settled back into her watch, Saber allowed herself something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for her cub's survival, but for something larger. The possibility that her people's story wasn't over. That this chapter was just beginning rather than ending. The humans had given them more than freedom. They had given them a future, and Saber intended to make sure that future was worthy of the price that had been paid for it. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled past in their ancient patterns, carrying a small ship full of refugees toward whatever destiny awaited them. But for the first time since the fall of Fenris Prime, that destiny felt like something they might actually have a say in choosing. Kepler 438b hung in space like a blue-green jewel, its surface painted with swirling clouds and vast continents covered in pristine wilderness. No cities scarred its landscapes, no industrial complexes poisoned its rivers. It was a world that had never known the touch of galactic civilization, protected by its remote location in an unmapped spiral arm. Home, Captain Chen said softly as they approached the planet's orbit. Population roughly 3,000, consisting of refugees from 47 different species. All of them people the galaxy decided were too inconvenient to live. Saber stood at the bridge viewport, her cubs pressed against her sides as they stared at their new world. Storm's tactical mind was already working, identifying defensible positions and natural boundaries. Luna gazed at the vast forest with wonder, while little Echo simply pressed his face against the transparent aluminum and whispered, "Trees, real trees." "How long has this place existed?" Saber asked. 12 years now, Chen replied. Started with a single human colony ship that went off-grid, rather than participate in the Council's relocation program for the Deneb refugees. Word spread quietly through the right channels. People who didn't fit the Council's idea of acceptable found their way here. The ship's sensors detected a small fleet of vessels rising from the planet's surface to meet them. Unlike the sleek, militaristic designs favored by the Council, these ships were functional works of art. Each one was different, reflecting the aesthetic preferences and technological capabilities of its builders. "Welcoming committee," the communications officer announced. "Mixed fleet, but I'm reading human. Saurian, Verdani, and interesting. At least 3 ships of unknown configuration. Lycan construction," Storm said with certainty, his young voice filled with emotion. "Those are pack ships. I recognize the hull design from the archive files Mama made us study." Chen looked surprised. "Archive files? Every Lycan carries the memory of our people," Saber explained. "Stories, technical knowledge, cultural practices. Everything needed to rebuild if we ever got the chance." The lead ship in the welcoming fleet was clearly human-built, but modified with additions from multiple species. Its captain appeared on the main screen, a weathered woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome to Haven, Haven's Grace," she said warmly. "I'm Admiral Sarah Martinez, Planetary Coordinator." "We've been expecting you," Chen smiled. "Good to see you again, Sarah. We've got some special passengers who are eager to stretch their legs on solid ground." "So I heard." "Captain Chen, your timing is perfect. The Council's been sniffing around Epsilon sector, so we accelerated our relocation timeline. Some of our people should be very interested in meeting your new friends." Within an hour, they were descending through Haven's atmosphere. The landing field was carved from a natural meadow, surrounded by towering trees that swayed in the gentle breeze. Buildings dotted the landscape, but they seemed to grow from the earth itself rather than imposing upon it. Saber's enhanced hearing picked up sounds that made her heart race. Howls. Distant, but unmistakable. The voices of her people calling across the wilderness. Her cubs heard them too, their ears pricking forward with excitement. "How many?" she whispered. 47 survivors when we last counted, Admiral Martinez said, overhearing. "Including cubs born here. Free cubs who've never known cages or fear." The airlock cycled open and Saber stepped onto alien soil for the first time in over a year. The scents that reached her nose were overwhelming in the best possible way. Growing things, clean water, the musk of various species living in harmony, and underneath it all, the familiar, comforting scent of pack. They emerged from the tree line like ghosts. 6 adult lichens, moving with the fluid grace of predators but radiating welcome rather than threat. Behind them, smaller figures darted between the trees. Cubs, real cubs, playing and exploring as nature intended. The lead adult was massive even by lichen standards, his dark fur streaked with silver that spoke of age and wisdom. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of an alpha. "I am Fenris Greymane, Alpha of Haven Pack," he said formally. "In the name of all free lichens, I welcome our lost family home." Saber felt her legs go weak. Fenris Greymane was a legend among her people, the last Alpha Prime of Fenris Prime. He had supposedly died defending the Great Library when the Council's bombs fell. To see him alive, healthy, and free was beyond anything she had dared hope. "Alpha Prime," she said, dropping to one knee in traditional greeting. Her cubs followed her example, though Echo wasn't quite sure why. "Rise, Pack Sister," Fenris said gently. "Here we are all equal under the sky. Rank is earned through deed, not bloodline." He approached her cubs with the careful movements of an adult showing respect to younglings. Storm met his gaze directly, earning an approving nod. Luna offered a shy smile, while Echo simply stared in wonder at the largest lichen he'd ever seen. "These are strong cubs," Fenris observed. "They will grow well in free air." Other species were gathering now, drawn by curiosity and the innate friendliness that seemed to characterize Haven's population. Saber saw humans, of course, but also saurians with their distinctive scaled hides, graceful Verdani swaying like living trees, and others she didn't immediately recognize. "The Council believes we're dead," Fenris explained as they walked toward the main settlement. "Most of us were listed as casualties when Fenris Prime fell. It's made starting over easier in some ways." "But the humans helped," Luna observed, her sharp young mind putting pieces together. "They saved you too." "The humans," Fenris agreed, "have a concept that translates roughly to paying it forward. They were once refugees themselves, on their own world. They remember what it felt like to be hunted for being different." The settlement's center was a natural amphitheater surrounded by buildings that blended multiple architectural styles. Human pragmatism merged with saurian geometric precision, softened by Verdani organic curves. At the heart of it all stood something that made Saber's breath catch. A memory stone. 30 feet of polished black granite covered in carved symbols, each one representing a life lost when Fenris Prime died. It was a monument to the dead, but also a promise that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. "We carve new names when we learn of survivors," Fenris explained. "Today we'll remove 4 names and add them to the living stone instead." That evening, Haven's population gathered in the amphitheater for what they called the Welcome Circle. It was part celebration, part information sharing, and part community bonding. Stories were told, skills were shared, and newcomers were formally introduced to their new home. Saber found herself standing before 3,000 beings from across the galaxy, her cubs at her side. The diversity was staggering, but what struck her most was the absence of fear. These people had found something precious, something the Council's rigid hierarchy couldn't understand. "I am Saber of the Moonhowl Pack," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "My cubs are Storm, Luna, and Echo. We were the last of our line, or so we believed. Today we discover that we are not alone, that family extends beyond blood and species." She paused, looking around at the faces illuminated by soft, bioluminescent lanterns. "The humans have a saying, home is where the heart is. For too long our hearts have been homeless. Tonight that changes." The howl that rose from her throat was pure emotion, grief for the lost and joy for the found woven together in ancient harmony. Her cubs joined their voices to hers, then the other lichens. Then something unprecedented happened. The other species began to vocalize too. Not howls, but their own expressions of belonging and acceptance. Human voices, saurian harmonics, the whispered music of the Verdani, all blending into something that had never existed before. A song of unity across the barriers of evolution and biology. As the chorus faded into the night, Saber realized that her journey was complete. Not the physical journey from prison ship to free world, but the spiritual journey from despair to hope. Her cubs would grow up here in safety and freedom, surrounded by a family that chose love over fear. The galaxy might be vast and often cruel, but here on Haven, a different kind of future was taking root. One where differences were celebrated rather than eliminated, where the strong protected the weak, and where no child would ever again die for the accident of their birth. It was, she thought, exactly what her ancestors would have wanted. 3 months after arriving on Haven, Saber stood at the edge of the Great Valley watching her cubs play with the other younglings in the crystal-clear stream below. Storm had grown visibly stronger, his shoulders broadening as he approached adolescence. Luna had discovered an aptitude for the healing arts, spending her days with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Haven's chief medical officer. Even little Echo had found his place, becoming the unofficial mascot of the human engineering crews who delighted in his endless curiosity about how things worked. But peace, Saber had learned, was often a temporary gift. The emergency klaxon shattered the pastoral morning, its urgent wail sending wildlife fleeing into the deep forest. Saber's combat instincts, dormant for months, snapped to full alertness. Her cubs looked up from their play, ears flattened against their heads. "All civilians to shelter positions," came Admiral Martinez's voice over the settlement's comm system. "This is not a drill. Council task force detected at the edge of the system." Saber's blood ran cold. Somehow, impossibly, they had been found. She bounded down the valley slope in great leaps, calling to her cubs. "Storm! Luna, Echo! To me now." The younglings responded instantly to the alpha tone in her voice, abandoning their games and racing toward her. Around the settlement, Haven's well-rehearsed emergency protocols were kicking into action. Humans secured critical systems, while the more martial species moved toward defensive positions. Captain Chen appeared at Saber's side, her face grim. "How long do we have?" Saber asked. 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky, Chen replied. "It's a full battle group. 3 heavy cruisers, a carrier, and at least 24 fighters. They're taking their time, probably scanning for defensive systems. Can we evacuate?" "Not everyone. The transport ships can't carry the full population, and someone has to stay to operate the defensive grid." Chen's expression was stone. "This was always a possibility. We knew they'd find us eventually." Fenris Greymane approached, his massive frame radiating controlled fury. "What forces do they bring?" "Admiral Kethvar's task force," Chen answered. "The same butcher who glassed Fenris Prime. He's brought enough firepower to sterilize this entire world." The name hit Fenris like a physical blow. Saber could see the memories playing behind his eyes, the horror of watching his homeworld burn. His claws extended involuntarily, scoring deep gouges in the bark of a nearby tree. "Then we make our stand here," he growled. "I will not run again. I will not watch another world die while I flee like a coward." "This isn't about courage," Chen said firmly. "It's about survival. About making sure the children live to see another day." "The children," Storm said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the young Lycan who had approached unnoticed. At 12 cycles old, he was old enough to understand what was happening, but young enough to see solutions that adults had dismissed. "They're coming for the children, aren't they?" "Not the adults. The children," Chen nodded grimly. "The Council's xenobiologists have determined that Lycan cubs raised in captivity are more tractable, easier to modify to control. They want to restart their breeding program with a fresh generation that has no memory of freedom." Saber's vision went red at the edges. The protective rage of a mother wolf coursed through her veins, but she forced herself to think tactically. "How many children are there on Haven?" 43 under the age of 15, counting all species," Admiral Martinez reported as she joined the group. "The transport ships can take maybe half the adult population along with all the children." "Then that's what we do," Saber said without hesitation. "The children leave. The warriors stay." "Mama, no." Luna had appeared beside her brother, her young face streaked with tears. "We won't leave you." Saber knelt and pulled both older cubs close, breathing in their scent. "Listen to me, my brave ones. What is the first law of the pack? Protect the young, Storm recited, though his voice cracked with emotion. And what is the second law? The pack survives even if individuals must be sacrificed, Luna whispered. Then you understand. You are the future of our people. Without you, everything we fought for dies. She looked into their eyes, seeing her own fierce determination reflected there. But I need you to do something for me. Something important. She turned to address the growing crowd of Haven's defenders. The council expects to find scared refugees, victims cowering and hiding, waiting to be slaughtered or captured. They don't expect to find warriors. Dr. Tanaka, the human medical officer who had become Luna's mentor, stepped forward. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Admiral Kethavar has never faced a coordinated defense by people who have nothing left to lose. Saber's smile was sharp as winter steel. The Lycans know these forests better than any off-world scanner can map them. The Saurians are natural tunnel fighters. The Verdani can communicate through the root networks of every plant on this continent. And the humans? Fenris asked with something that might have been humor. The humans, Chen said with matching smile, are very good at improvising. Over the next 4 hours, Haven transformed from a peaceful settlement into a fortress. The evacuation ships launched under cover of the forest canopy, their heat signatures masked by carefully positioned thermal generators. To orbital sensors, it would look like normal industrial activity. The children were the hardest part. Echo clung to Saber until the last possible moment, his small frame shaking with fear and confusion. Storm and Luna were old enough to understand the necessity, but young enough to feel abandoned despite all logical explanations. Promise me, Luna whispered, as the boarding ramp began to rise. Promise you'll come find us. I promise, Saber lied, because sometimes love required deception. Take care of your little brother. As the ships disappeared into the darkening sky, the adults of Haven settled in to wait. The defensive grid was online, hidden weapon emplacements charged and ready. Tunnel networks that had been excavated over 3 years of secret preparation buzzed with activity. Contact, the sensor operator announced. They're breaking orbit. Estimate 20 minutes to atmospheric entry. Admiral Kethavar's voice crackled over the comm frequencies, arrogant and familiar. Attention, illegal colonists. You are in violation of Galactic Council ordinances regarding unauthorized settlement. Surrender immediately and submit to lawful detention or face the consequences. Chen activated the response transmitter. Admiral Kethavar, this is Admiral Sarah Martinez, commanding Haven Defense Force. Your ordinances hold no authority here. Withdraw immediately or face defensive action. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of weapons charging and final preparations being made. Then Kethavar's laughter echoed across the frequencies. Defensive action? Against a full council battle group? You're as delusional as the rest of your pathetic species. The transmission shifted to a wider broadcast. All council forces, you are authorized to use maximum force. Leave no survivors. The first wave came in low and fast, atmospheric fighters designed for ground attack. They expected to find helpless refugees scattered across the settlement. Instead, they flew into a carefully orchestrated crossfire. Hidden plasma cannons erupted from concealed positions, their energy bolts turning 3 fighters into expanding clouds of superheated debris. Surface-to-air missiles launched from camouflaged silos, their guidance systems slaved to targeting computers that had been plotting attack vectors for hours. But the real surprise came when the forest itself seemed to come alive. Verdani combat forms that had been dormant in the tree line suddenly revealed themselves, their bark-like skin providing perfect camouflage until the moment they unleashed devastating thorn volleys at the low-flying aircraft. What in the 7 hells? Kethavar's voice crackled over the comm, no longer confident. That, Chen replied calmly, would be the consequences you were warned about. The first assault wave was broken in less than 10 minutes. Of the 24 fighters that had entered the atmosphere, only 6 made it back to orbit. But Saber knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the capital ships began their bombardment. She crouched in a forward observation post, her enhanced senses tracking movement in the darkness above. Somewhere up there, her cubs were racing toward safety aboard the evacuation ships. The thought gave her strength even as the first orbital bombardment began to light up the horizon. The battle for Haven had begun, and with it, perhaps the last chance for the galaxy's outcast to prove they deserved to exist. Hold the line, she whispered into her comm unit, her voice carrying to every defender scattered across the wilderness. For our children, for our future, for everyone who dies free rather than live in chains. The response came back in a dozen languages, but the meaning was universal. We hold. The orbital bombardment turned night into day as plasma bolts rained from the sky like the wrath of angry gods. Ancient trees that had stood for centuries were reduced to ash in seconds. Mountains were carved into new shapes by the focused fury of council weapons, but Admiral Kethvar quickly discovered that bombing an empty forest was different from fighting an enemy that fought back. Saber moved through the underground tunnel network like a ghost, her enhanced hearing tracking the movement of forces above. The Saurians had outdone themselves with these passages, creating a three-dimensional maze that connected every major defensive position while remaining invisible to orbital sensors. Status. Report, she whispered into her comm as she reached Defensive Position 7, North. Perimeter holding, came Fenris's voice, steady despite the hell raining above them. The Verdani route network is giving us perfect intelligence on enemy movement patterns. Engineering reports all primary systems still operational, added Chief Torres, the human who had designed most of their defensive grid. The quantum scramblers are keeping their targeting computers confused. Admiral Martinez's voice cut through the chatter. Heads up, people. 3 heavy shuttles launching from the flagship. They're coming down for a ground assault. Saber's predator smile was invisible in the darkness of the tunnels. This was what they had been waiting for. Orbital bombardment was impersonal, devastating but ultimately limited in precision. Ground troops had to face defenders on equal terms. All units, remember your training, she broadcast. Let them come to us. Make them fight for every meter. The first shuttle touched down in what had been the settlement's main square, disgorging 40 Council Marines in full combat armor. They moved with military precision, weapons sweeping for targets that weren't there. The second shuttle landed near the northern perimeter, while the third set down close to the river. Like clockwork, Chen's voice whispered over the comm. She was coordinating from the central command bunker, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. They're following standard urban assault doctrine. Secure the center, establish perimeters, sweep outward. Too bad we're not fighting a standard battle, Torres replied. The forest erupted around the northern landing zone first. What the Marines had taken for dead wood and fallen logs suddenly revealed itself as perfectly camouflaged Verdani warriors. Thorn volleys and strangling vines turned the clearing into a killing ground in seconds. But the real surprise came from below. Saurian tunnel fighters burst from concealed entrances, their natural armor shrugging off small arms fire, while their claws and natural weapons found the weak points in Council combat suits. The southern team found themselves facing something even more unexpected. Human defenders, but not the soft, civilized humans of Council propaganda. These were people who had learned warfare from some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. They fought with Lycan pack tactics, Saurian tunnel warfare, and Verdani coordination, wrapped in human adaptability and innovation. Fall back. Fall back! The Council squad leader's voice crackled over intercepted frequencies. We need orbital support. The intelligence was wrong. This isn't a refugee camp. Admiral Kethvar's response was predictably brutal. Negative. Complete the mission or don't bother coming back. Saber emerged from a concealed entrance 20 meters behind the main Council force, her movement silent as death itself. Storm had gotten his tactical mind from both parents, but his predatory instincts were pure Lycan. 3 Marines went down before their squad mates even realized they were under attack from behind. The battle raged for 3 hours. Council forces had superior equipment and training, but Haven's defenders had something more valuable. They were fighting for their home, their families, their right to exist. Every tree, every rock, every stream was an ally that they knew intimately. When the sun finally rose over the scarred landscape, the surviving Council Marines were trapped in 3 isolated pockets, their numbers reduced by more than half. The shuttles that had brought them were smoking ruins, destroyed by precisely placed charges that had been hidden for months in preparation for exactly this moment. Admiral, came the panicked voice of a Council ground commander. We need immediate extraction. The situation down here is untenable. Impossible, Kethvar replied coldly. You have your orders. Secure the area and locate the refugee children for extraction. Sir, there are no children here. This entire operation was a trap. We're fighting trained military forces, not civilians. For the first time since the battle began, uncertainty crept into the Admiral's voice. Explain. Chen chose that moment to break into the Council frequencies, her voice carrying clearly across all channels. Admiral Keithvar, this is Admiral Martinez. Your ground forces are surrounded and outnumbered. I'm offering them the chance to surrender. You're offering my forces surrender? Keithvar's laugh was harsh. You're talking to the commander of 3 heavy cruisers. I can glass this entire continent. Yes, you can, Chen agreed calmly. But you won't. And why is that? Because while you've been playing target practice with Empty Forest, our real fleet has been moving into position. On the main tactical display aboard Keithvar's flagship, proximity alarms began to scream. Ships were decloaking all around the Council task force. Not refugee transports or converted civilian vessels, but actual warships. Sleek human cruisers, massive Saurian dreadnoughts, and something that made the Admiral's blood run cold. A Lycan pack ship that the intelligence reports claimed had been destroyed over Fenris Prime. Impossible, he whispered. Our sources confirmed you had no significant military assets. Your sources, came a new voice over the comm, speaking with the unmistakable authority of an Alpha Prime, were misinformed. This is Fenris Greymane aboard the battleship Last Howl. You killed my world, Keithvar. Today I return the favor. The space battle that followed was brief and decisive. The Council task force was designed to intimidate civilian populations and destroy undefended targets. They were not prepared to face a coordinated defense by some of the galaxy's most effective military species, working in perfect harmony. The flagship Righteous Purpose tried to run, but human-designed engines powered by Saurian engineering and coordinated by Verdani biotechnology proved superior. Keithvar's last transmission was a scream of rage and disbelief as his ship's hull cracked open like an egg. When the debris stopped falling and the smoke cleared, Haven was still there. Scarred but not broken, wounded but not defeated. Saber stood in the ruins of the main square, watching evacuation shuttles descend from orbit. Her cubs would be on one of those ships, safe and alive because adults had been willing to risk everything for their future. Status report, she called to her scattered forces. Perimeter secure, Fenris reported. Casualties light. The enemy is scattered or surrendered. Engineering systems operational, Torres added. Defensive grid intact. Medical reports 23 wounded. No fatalities among our forces, came Dr. Tanaka's voice. Chen appeared at Saber's side, her uniform torn and scorched but her smile bright with victory. Not bad for a bunch of refugees and outcasts. We're not refugees anymore, Saber replied, watching the first shuttle touch down in the improvised landing zone. We're citizens. Citizens of Haven. Citizens of the galaxy. Citizens of whatever future we choose to build. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and small figures came racing across the scarred ground. Storm, Luna, and Echo threw themselves into their mother's arms with the desperate intensity of children who had truly feared they might never see her again. You promised, Luna whispered against her fur. You promised you'd come find us. I keep my promises, Saber replied, her voice thick with emotion. All of them. As the family embraced in the ruins of their settlement, ships from across the galaxy continued to arrive in Haven's orbit. Word of the victory was spreading through the underground networks that connected the outcasts and refugees of 100 worlds. The galaxy's forgotten peoples were coming home. But more than that, they were no longer alone. The Battle of Haven had proved something that the Galactic Council had spent decades trying to deny. That the so-called lesser species could not only defend themselves, but could win when they stood together. The age of hiding was over. The age of resistance had begun. The orbital bombardment turned night into day as plasma bolts rained from the sky like the wrath of angry gods. Ancient trees that had stood for centuries were reduced to ash in seconds. Mountains were carved into new shapes by the focused fury of council weapons, but Admiral Keithvar quickly discovered that bombing an empty forest was different from fighting. An enemy that fought back, Saber moved through the underground tunnel network like a ghost, her enhanced hearing tracking the movement of forces above. The Saurians had outdone themselves with these passages, creating a three-dimensional maze that connected every major defensive position while remaining invisible to orbital sensors. Status. Report, she whispered into her comm as she reached Defensive Position 7, North. Perimeter holding, came Fenris's voice, steady despite the hell raining above them. The Verdani route network is giving us perfect intelligence on enemy movement patterns. Engineering reports all primary systems still operational, added Chief Torres, the human who had designed most of their defensive grid. The quantum scramblers are keeping their targeting computers confused. Admiral Martinez's voice cut through the chatter. Heads up, people. 3 heavy shuttles launching from the flagship. They're coming down for a ground assault. Saber's predator smile was invisible in the darkness of the tunnels. This was what they had been waiting for. Orbital bombardment was impersonal, devastating but ultimately limited in precision. Ground troops had to face defenders on equal terms. All units, remember your training, she broadcast. Let them come to us. Make them fight for every meter. The first shuttle touched down in what had been the settlement's main square, disgorging 40 Council Marines in full combat armor. They moved with military precision, weapons sweeping for targets that weren't there. The second shuttle landed near the northern perimeter, while the third set down close to the river. Like clockwork, Chen's voice whispered over the comm. She was coordinating from the central command bunker, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. They're following standard urban assault doctrine. Secure the center, establish perimeters, sweep outward. Too bad we're not fighting a standard battle, Torres replied. The forest erupted around the northern landing zone first. What the Marines had taken for dead wood and fallen logs suddenly revealed itself as perfectly camouflaged Verdani warriors. Thorn volleys and strangling vines turned the clearing into a killing ground in seconds. But the real surprise came from below. Saurian tunnel fighters burst from concealed entrances, their natural armor shrugging off small arms fire, while their claws and natural weapons found the weak points in Council combat suits. The southern team found themselves facing something even more unexpected. Human defenders, but not the soft, civilized humans of Council propaganda. These were people who had learned warfare from some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. They fought with Lycan pack tactics, Saurian tunnel warfare, and Verdani coordination, wrapped in human adaptability and innovation. Fall back. Fall back! The Council squad leader's voice crackled over intercepted frequencies. We need orbital support. The intelligence was wrong. This isn't a refugee camp. Admiral Kethavar's response was predictably brutal. Negative. Complete the mission or don't bother coming back. Saber emerged from a concealed entrance 20 meters behind the main Council force, her movement silent as death itself. Storm had gotten his tactical mind from both parents, but his predatory instincts were pure Lycan. 3 Marines went down before their squad mates even realized they were under attack from behind. The battle raged for 3 hours. Council forces had superior equipment and training, but Haven's defenders had something more valuable. They were fighting for their home, their families, their right to exist. Every tree, every rock, every stream was an ally that they knew intimately. When the sun finally rose over the scarred landscape, the surviving Council Marines were trapped in 3 isolated pockets, their numbers reduced by more than half. The shuttles that had brought them were smoking ruins, destroyed by precisely placed charges that had been hidden for months in preparation for exactly this moment. Admiral, came the panicked voice of a Council ground commander. We need immediate extraction. The situation down here is untenable. Impossible, Kethavar replied coldly. You have your orders. Secure the area and locate the refugee children for extraction. Sir, there are no children here. This entire operation was a trap. We're fighting trained military forces, not civilians. For the first time since the battle began, uncertainty crept into the Admiral's voice. Explain. Chen chose that moment to break into the Council frequencies, her voice carrying clearly across all channels. Admiral Kethavar, this is Admiral Martinez. Your ground forces are surrounded and outnumbered. I'm offering them the chance to surrender. You're offering my forces surrender? Kethavar's laugh was harsh. You're talking to the commander of 3 heavy cruisers. I can glass this entire continent. Yes, you can, Chen agreed calmly. But you won't. And why is that? Because while you've been playing target practice with empty forest, our real fleet has been moving into position. On the main tactical display aboard Kethavar's flagship, proximity alarms began to scream. Ships were decloaking all around the Council task force. Not refugee transports or converted civilian vessels, but actual warships. Sleek human cruisers, massive Saurian dreadnoughts, and something that made the Admiral's blood run cold. a Lycan pack ship that the intelligence reports claimed had been destroyed over Fenris Prime. Impossible, he whispered. Our sources confirmed you had no significant military assets. Your sources, came a new voice over the comm, speaking with the unmistakable authority of an Alpha Prime, were misinformed. This is Fenris Greymane aboard the battleship Last Howl. You killed my world, Kethvar. Today I return the favor. The space battle that followed was brief and decisive. The Council task force was designed to intimidate civilian populations and destroy undefended targets. They were not prepared to face a coordinated defense by some of the galaxy's most effective military species, working in perfect harmony. The flagship Righteous Purpose tried to run, but human-designed engines powered by Saurian engineering and coordinated by Verdani biotechnology proved superior. Kethavar's last transmission was a scream of rage and disbelief as his ship's hull cracked open like an egg. When the debris stopped falling and the smoke cleared, Haven was still there. Scarred but not broken, wounded but not defeated. Saber stood in the ruins of the main square, watching evacuation shuttles descend from orbit. Her cubs would be on one of those ships, safe and alive because adults had been willing to risk everything for their future. Status report, she called to her scattered forces. Perimeter secure, Fenris reported. Casualties light. The enemy is scattered or surrendered. Engineering systems operational, Torres added. Defensive grid intact. Medical reports 23 wounded. No fatalities among our forces, came Dr. Tanaka's voice. Chen appeared at Saber's side, her uniform torn and scorched but her smile bright with victory. Not bad for a bunch of refugees and outcasts. We're not refugees anymore, Saber replied, watching the first shuttle touch down in the improvised landing zone. We're citizens. Citizens of Haven. Citizens of the galaxy. Citizens of whatever future we choose to build. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and small figures came racing across the scarred ground. Storm, Luna, and Echo threw themselves into their mother's arms with the desperate intensity of children who had truly feared they might never see her again. You promised, Luna whispered against her fur. You promised you'd come find us. I keep my promises, Saber replied, her voice thick with emotion. All of them. As the family embraced in the ruins of their settlement, ships from across the galaxy continued to arrive in Haven's orbit. Word of the victory was spreading through the underground networks that connected the outcasts and refugees of 100 worlds. The galaxy's forgotten peoples were coming home. But more than that, they were no longer alone. The Battle of Haven had proved something that the Galactic Council had spent decades trying to deny. That the so-called lesser species could not only defend themselves but could win when they stood together. The age of hiding was over. The age of resistance had begun,